Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works.
All right, well, return guest Dale Jacobs' latest book is called Makeshift Fields. I'm excited to welcome him back to this show. Dale, how's it going?
It's good. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing very well. I want to start with the title, because when you first announced this project, you started an Instagram called Chasing Baseball. And was that initially what you were going to call the book? It's the subtitle, but it seems like maybe that was where you were headed.
It was the working title for the book for a long time, and then it was actually my publisher when they were writing some of the blurb material. They used this phrase "makeshift fields," and I thought that's exactly what this book is about. Because it's so much about trying to find space to play and having to, cobble together what you can.
Now, I was listening back to the Authority File podcast that you did on Comics and Grief. And at the time you said, 100 Miles of Baseball was for your dad, and On Comics and Grief was obviously for your mom. Who's this book for?
Honestly, it was initially just curiosity on my part. But as I interviewed people and spent time with the players and the coaches and the umpires, uh, it really became about them. It's a book I feel a tremendous responsibility to the people I met and to how I represent baseball in all of these places.
So those people that you connect with, obviously one of the things that I want to talk about is kind of logistics and planning, because as you note in the book, the availability of baseball is a little more sparse, right? That like you have to plan your visits around the fact that there's games on weekends. It's not like you can go catch a midweek matchup or something. And how much of kind of like the legwork had to happen ahead of time for a book like this?
Oh, a lot. I planned very concretely where I would be on what days. I was in contact with a variety of clubs, and I knew I had games scheduled, but I also was going to go to practices, or I had to get used to them calling it training. Uh, but as I went along, I realized that going to the training sessions was sometimes actually more valuable than going to the games, because it gave me much more time to talk to people and to see why they were there. For some people, training was what they would go to. So some of the larger clubs where not everyone could play, people would just go to training, and for some people, that's what they actually wanted, was the training sessions and the drills once a week, or for some clubs twice a week.
Now, I take it obviously from that comment that was not necessarily something you anticipated going into this project.
No, not at all, because I still had 100 Miles of Baseball in the back of my head, which is a book that's about the games. We didn't go to any practices, and we also didn't talk to anyone. So it was from our perspective as watchers of baseball. This is very much more about talking to the people involved. So there is some descriptions of baseball, but it really is about the people.
So how do you go about, like, are you going on social media to find these clubs and then making connections with people, or going on like the team websites and things to connect with people via email? How did you kind of start sussing this out?
So I started by thinking about baseball in Ireland. So I first contacted the Mariners, who are a club in the suburbs of Dublin, south suburbs of Dublin. So I contacted them, and through them, they told me, "Oh, actually, there's a Windsor connection." So there's someone who lives in Windsor, uh, Michael Anthony Ferrato, who had played with the Mariners and had played on the national team, and as well, or he and Brendan Power, also from Windsor, had played on the national team. So that gave me an inroad, and then people started to hear about the project, so I got contacted by someone from Baseball Ireland who gave me an entree into some other people. Then I saw there was a team in Cork, so I contacted them. I started to contact teams in Scotland, and then again, people started to see that I was doing this project. And so Gabriel Fiddler, who ended up editing the book, contacted me, giving me some suggestions for clubs to contact. So it was partly cold calling and partly networking that led to the people I talked with.
Had you conceived it initially as just going to Ireland, or did you always want to do, Scotland, Wales, England as well?
There was a brief moment when I thought about just Ireland, but it seemed like it would be more interesting if there would be a bit of comparison. And to be honest, there's just not enough baseball in Ireland. It's basically a bunch of clubs centered in Dublin, one club in Cork, and one club in Belfast. So it was a bit impractical, but also I started to see there's some interesting things going on in the UK as well.
So at that point, you start kind of sussing out. Okay, there's more to it. You start plotting things out. Do you have a sense of kind of a trajectory of a book before you start the like actual like boots on the ground work? Like, are you the type of person who kind of maps out what you want to do within the book, or do you plot your journey and then figure out your book as the journey goes along?
Yeah, it's plotting the journey. I think, I've talked to you several times. You probably can see what I like to do is conceive of a concentrated project of some kind. So 50 games in one summer within 100 miles, or reading all the comics from one year, or going for a 7-week trip and seeing what baseball is like in these different places and having those parameters. So I have that, and then I come back and I start to work on the book. And as I start to work, for me to carry on, I need to have some kind of structure develop. So once the structure falls into place, then I can start to write. For this one, it became apparent very quickly that the structure of the book would be essentially the structure of the trip. That made the most sense, both in terms of chronicling the journey, because it's partly a bit of a travel log, but also the Ireland material really sets up a lot of the rest of the material in the book.
Yeah, you use that as obviously like the contrast point for other baseball within those other countries and clubs that you visit, right? Like the baseball Ireland, the strike zone, the way that they're trying to develop players, their approach kind of is a refractal point for the
Yes.
comparisons.
Yeah, very much. And as I went along, I realized that what Baseball Ireland was doing in trying to develop kids and young players and bring people up through the system was very different than what was happening with especially Baseball UK, because, they famously were just at the World Baseball Classic, but none of those players are British born. They're all passport holders. And that was decidedly not what Baseball Ireland was doing and continues to do. So I saw a big contrast there, and I was able to talk about that a little bit. Um, and thinking about youth baseball is something that runs through, even though I only really see it in Dublin and then in Cardiff, talking to Holly about what she's trying to do. But you also see so many people talking about how important they know it is, but it's so labor intensive, and it's just finding the volunteers to do it, and that's difficult. Um, but yeah, that experience with Baseball Ireland, especially with Strike Zone and what they were doing, was always in the back of my mind as I thought about what was happening with baseball in the other places.
It's interesting you brought up the point about volunteers. Like that is a recurrent thing in terms of like the people that are doing it. The baseball exists in these places because of certain people putting in the work, and it seems kind of fragile.
It's very fragile, and that's one thing that someone like Sean Mitchell, who's one of the main people behind baseball in Ireland, emphasized to me more than once is how fragile it is. And that's why they're trying to develop the infrastructure to support it. But in all of these places, yes, it's fragile. And it's generally one or two or three people in each place who are really putting in the long hours and the big work to make sure, because like everywhere else, there's some people who come and they play and then they go back to their lives and then they come back and they play. But there need to be the people who do the scheduling and make sure that the organizational structure is there and that the fields get taken care of and all of that difficult work.
You write at one point that maybe this is what you get with it being a niche sport. It's a sport that needs to be nurtured and a sport where everyone has to pull together. It seems like obviously at the time you were writing about the Irish baseball, but that you're writing about all of those countries at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a niche sport in all of these places, and it's not the first sport people think about. In Ireland, it's certainly, if when we're talking about kids, it's not initially what kids are drawn to because they're much more drawn to hurling or football or one of these other sports that are more traditional. And in England, you're competing with football, you're competing with cricket, and same with for adults. It's not the first recreational activity people think about at all. So it's very much is this niche sport, and it's fragile for that reason. But it's also, I think, kind of a point of pride for a lot of people that they play this and other people don't.
Yeah, it does seem to. I don't want to say like it's outsiders, but it's people who aren't necessarily drawn to the thing that everyone likes. Like it does seem to attract kind of like a certain sensibility.
Yeah, that's true. And it is a mix of expats from, I met Canadians, I met Americans, people from a number of Latin American countries, from Poland, from all these different places who played baseball at home. And this is a way to have a piece of home with them. But then there's also people who are from Ireland or from Scotland or from England who learned the game as adults and were drawn to it for some reason, either because they watched it late at night on the television and got interested, or for whatever reason they're drawn to playing it.
Yeah, those late night television things. It seems to be several people, at least particularly in the UK, bring up watching, getting into baseball with these broadcasts, and it does make me wonder about kind of like the global reach of sport and whether like the on demand streamers versus these kind of like passive like it just happens to be on and I catch it kind of the MLB.TV people have to subscribe, right? Like they have to seek it out and they
Yes.
already have to kind of be interested. Whereas these kind of like, I just happen to catch this, on Channel 4 or whatever, stations broadcasting it, and it piqued my interest. And I was curious about kind of that as not necessarily a marketing tool, but like an incubator.
Yeah, that particularly came up in the UK. It didn't come up in Ireland at all, but in the UK, in the early part of this century, there were a lot of these broadcasts. And so young people who were staying up late at night happened to see it and they got drawn in and then decided at one point, I'd like to try this. This looks like it would be fun. And that story came up over and over again when I was in the UK. And yeah, just being able to come across it instead of having to seek it out through one of the streaming services, because as you said, you have to already know about it. So I think that was a particular moment in time that brought some people into the game.
So you obviously lifelong fan of the game. You didn't need to discover it late night on television or something, but you still learn a few things while you're over there. There's the point at which you find out about some follow on rule.
Yeah, people ask if the game is the same, and generally it is. Generally, once you start watching, it's exactly the same game. Skill levels vary, but it's the game we watch here. But they have a couple of odd rules about a team getting too far ahead, and instead of just having a mercy rule where if one team's up by 10, you stop the game, they have this follow-on rule that gives an extra at bat to allow a team to try to catch up. Very small rules, and very few teams or leagues use that. I saw it in the tournament I was at Slough. The other odd thing at the tournament was the time rule, but I've seen that in tournaments here as well, especially youth tournaments where you have 2 hours to play a game, and you once you get to a certain time limit, that's the last inning, etc. But I'd never seen it come into play to quite the extent it did here.
Yeah, I was curious about did you fully recognize the game you were seeing there? And it does seem like for the most part, yes. Even if the skill level, like you said, varied.
Yeah, for the most part, it's the same game. You go to practice and they do the stretching drills to start. Then they might jog around the field, and then they take infield practice. And then, depending on how many people in the particular club or what they have for equipment, there might be some people in a cage taking batting practice. You might have a pitching machine. You might have just soft toss, but it's the same basic drills that you would see at any other practice. The game is virtually the same. There's a little bit of difference in terms of how the cheering works for each other. It's not quite the same as you would see here, but between the lines, it's pretty much the same.
I want to circle back to the title again because the subtitle is Chasing Baseball. Obviously,
Yeah.
Chasing Baseball across Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales. The choice of the word chasing, because it suggests it's maybe like elusive or kind of trying to stay away from you or something rather than like discovering. Why did you land on that word, that descriptor, and was there something about that like the action of it or the like slipperiness of something that's being chased? Like why did you land on chasing?
I think I landed on chasing as the working title because I didn't know what I was looking for initially. That I was trying to find something what would I didn't know what it would look like. So I think I was chasing this idea of baseball. And as I said, I didn't know what it would be initially. I didn't know what kind of people I would meet, what baseball would look like. So I think that's how I landed on it initially.
Gotcha. Now you were talking about obviously giving yourself some parameters, some guardrails is something that you did with the comic book project with 100 miles of baseball. The other thing I was thinking about kind of in terms of your trajectory is the first baseball book that you did was Sunday with the Tigers, and you were an editor.
Yes.
And it was, the MLB team right beside you, in Detroit rather than where you live in Windsor. With 100 miles, it was a collaborative project with Heidi, and it was, moving further afield, right? Like you're driving around within this 100-mile limit. This is the one where you do it by yourself, but you go the farthest away.
Yeah.
And I was curious about like if you'd given any thought to like you went from kind of like very proximate, but like you're at a remove to you're most invested, but you have to go the furthest afield to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. This project, in many ways, couldn't have happened without 100 miles of baseball, because I think it gave me the platform from which I could move farther out. And it was also the logical extension because I needed to see baseball somewhere else. And I didn't want to go to somewhere that baseball was already a big part of the culture like Japan or Latin America. And so when I found out it was here, it seemed like it was perfect for I'm just continually trying to think about what baseball is, what it means to me, but what is it? What does it mean to people? So seeing it from another several countries' perspectives or the people who live there was a great way to do that.
Why did you rule out going to it like Latin America or Japan where it's already part of the culture? Like did you want to find people who their connection was more tenuous than yours?
I guess I wanted to, yeah, to see it through eyes that don't have baseball on the mind so much of the time as in Japan or Latin America. I mean, the other thing on a practical level is there's already lots of writing about baseball in Japan, for example. Um, there's no writing about baseball in Ireland and the UK. So, on a practical level, that's there as well. So, both of those things inform my thinking a bit.
That's kind of more at the like macro publishing level that you're thinking about
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. I mean, if I'd gone to Invisible and said, "Oh, I want to do a book on Japan and baseball," the the reaction would have been, "Well, what are the comps?" And I would have had to say, "Okay, well, there's already all these books." But in this case, going to my publisher, I could say, "There's no other book. There's some comps, but they're not they're not on this location at all."
The one upside of that, the like you're going to a place where it's tenuous, as you point out, you're going to a place where baseball isn't second nature to people. And so a lot of the people are like developing the skills in real time.
Absolutely, and I saw that a lot, and especially the people learning baseball as adults. One of the things that several people said to me is that learning to throw was so difficult because there are no games in the UK that you play as children that have the throwing motion. If you play cricket, that throwing motion is completely different. So just learning the mechanics of throwing was difficult for a lot of people. But I certainly saw a lot of very new players playing at the Mariners, certainly the Leicester Diamonds. There was one woman who came for the first time. She'd never played baseball ever before, and that was her first practice. So you definitely do get those people learning the basic skills of the game, which is really exciting to see them take that step. And also people having to learn the rules, learn the strategies, things if you've played baseball a long time, you learn as a kid which base to throw to, strategic thinking on the field, even just the rules. A lot of the people that I encountered, they had learned those things or were still learning those things.
Yeah, when you're in Wales, I think it is the Merlins teams, the manager Steve, you talk to him about the fact that like when folks are fielding a ball, you know, the innate sense of like when you're fielding a ball that's at a high or low trajectory as to like where
Yeah.
you when you flip the glove over,
Yep.
that has to be taught. It's not, baked in because they've been doing it for years.
No, not at all. For so many for the people who learn as adults, there's none of that muscle memory of something about where do you position your glove. Um, and so much of that is just think you can see them thinking through these things uh, as they do them. So yeah, I thought that conversation with Steve about where to position the glove was a really great example of that.
And it does seem to provide you with like when you talk to some of the adults who are kind of getting into the game that like that conscious thought and that practice and like you said, people who just go to the practices and don't necessarily play games, that seems to be something they're jazzed about, that's what attracts them to it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, several people said, I never thought I'd be so excited about a new sport. So learning these new things. So it engages both their bodies, but for a lot of them, it's engaging their minds because this is all so new to learn. And yeah, it's exciting for them.
In the Welsh section, you go by a inscription in Welsh that in translation says, "In these stones horizons sing," and you reflect on the fact that, like, you know, there's something to be said about the baseball and like these fields, and that the horizons are singing for you.
Yeah, I think so. I just that's a quotation that I sort of came across happenstance just walking, and yeah, it helped me to think a little bit about the fields they play on, and the relationship they have with them, and how baseball figures into that.
You talked before about, you know, like this book was for those people that like the prior books for your dad and your mom. This is for those people you end up talking to. Now that the book is out, do you have a sense that, like, they feel you captured them?
I don't know yet because it doesn't come out in the UK or Ireland until the 15th of May. So I actually don't know. And of course, I'm slightly nervous about that. I hope I have. I think I have. But I guess I'll see once the book starts filtering into them.
Well, TBD, but I quite enjoyed this book, Chasing Baseball Across Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales. It's Makeshift Fields, out through Invisible Publishing. Dale, thanks for joining me once again on Turning Pages.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it.